Hello friends, my name's Emile and welcome back to some more Forza Top Gear laps. Today we're taking a look at some classic muscle cars. Let's jump into it straight away with the first car of today, which is the Ford Mustang Boss 302, 290 horsepower, 3,250 pounds of weight, the lightest car here today, also the least powerful vehicle here today. Now, that might not necessarily be a bad thing. You see, what are American muscle cars known for? Having a lot of power and not a lot of control, and in the wet, that can be a bit of an issue. However, if we have a bit less power, that might actually make the cars a bit more controllable, and well, as we've seen throughout this series, that can occasionally work out, so I kind of was curious to see if it would for the classic muscle cars, and in the case of the Boss 302, it definitely seemed to have done, because the Boss 302 wasn't a bad car actually. It wasn't as good as a modern sports car, or hell, even really a sports car of the time, but it was a solid car to drive, certainly. Didn't really have too much in the way of issues with the Boss 302. 290 horsepower honestly isn't an awful lot in the grand scheme of things, so the Mustang can put its power down reasonably well. The lightweight also kind of helps it a little bit. You know, straight line speed and so on, it isn't massively quick compared to some of the vehicles here today. It's still pretty decent though. Again, this is actually the lightest car by a relatively fair margin as well. You know, we've got cars that are almost pushing 4,000 pounds here today. So the Mustang, in comparison to all these, is basically a Lotus. So, but yeah, Boss 302 was an enjoyable car to drive, certainly. Did quite enjoy my time with this one. Unlike the next car, which is the Chevrolet Camaro SS 1969 model, this one. 375 horsepower, 3,527 pounds of weight. This has about mid-range of the power and about middling weight as well, so this is the average car of the day. And I've got to admit, the Camaro is not fun to drive. Didn't like my time with the Camaro. It's just not very good to drive. It's kind of wallowy. It feels a little bit like driving on ice, this car. Admittedly, you know, most of the muscle cars here today do. But yeah, the Chevy was not particularly good. I was expecting this thing to honestly be a bit quicker than the Mustang, but honestly it wasn't. I mean, straight line speed, it has the aerodynamics of a barn. Between the Boss and the Camaro, I think there was a little bit of a difference speed-wise. I think the Camaro may have the advantage on the straights, but you can just see it through the corners. It just does not handle them as nearly as well as the Mustang, and as such the Mustang can just take so much speed through the corners compared to the Camaro here. So yeah, not a particularly good showing for the Chevrolet Camaro. You can see how wide it runs on the follow through there. Yeah, most of the cars were doing that today. They didn't like the follow through. Again, these cars weren't undrivable per se. They were very tricky to drive though. You know, on the dry track they seemed to do relatively well. On the wet track, the muscle cars here today did struggle a little bit, but we'll get into more of that later on. One muscle car that didn't particularly struggle though was the next car, which is the Pontiac Firebird Trans Am, again 1969 model, 345 horsepower, 3,306 pounds of weight. As far as statistics go, this one actually should be pretty darn promising. Power it's not the second lowest powered car here today. So the power is relatively decent. Again, as we've already discussed as well, lower power might actually be good for these cars. However, it is the second lightest car. 3,300 pounds is not that far off the Boss 302. So, anyways, how does the Trans Am drive? It was pretty darn decent actually. Through the corners, this vehicle is surprisingly good. Might be the best handling of the muscle cars here today, or at least one of. It was good. However, that did come at the price of straight line speed. Don't know what it was about the Firebird. It just was not particularly good in a straight line. Actually, I do know one of the reasons for that, and that was the gearbox is a little bit dodgy. Trying to find where to shift in this car is weird. Sort of the red line, you shouldn't really change on the red line. You can actually go quite far past the red line, and you know, in my experience on the later laps, that actually made the car a little bit quicker. But yeah, the Firebird was a bit of a weird car to drive, but still, you know, through the corners it was decent. To be fair, out of all the cars here today, this is probably the one that would make the best sort of race project build, if you will. This one definitely shows the most amount of promise. Next up, a car which actually did go racing. This is the Dodge Charger Daytona, 425 horsepower, 3,875 pounds of weight. The second heaviest car here today by only 5 pounds. However, it is one of the more powerful vehicles here today, of course, powered by the Hemi engine. So, the Charger Daytona, it does look ridiculous going around this track, doesn't it? This car is so goddamn huge. We had the Fast and Furious version of this car go around, and it did relatively well, so I was kind of curious to see how the stock version would do, especially compared to the standard Dodge Charger, which we have gone around the track before in. So, yeah, the Daytona, it was alright. Pretty relatively quick in a straight line. There were quicker cars here today, you know, it has got downforce. I mean, look at the ironing board on the back, it's definitely got some downforce on it, hasn't it? And the downforce I was thinking might play into the corners, and honestly it wasn't too terrible through the corners, apart from one corner. There was one corner the Daytona had huge issue with, and that was this follow through right here. It was just wanting to understeer off into the grass. I had to do about 80 miles per hour through there, and that was true of some of the other cars here today as well, which is one of the slowest speeds I've ever taken through the follow through. These cars just cannot take the usual 90-95 miles per hour, not a chance. You can even see it understeering a little bit there. It's a little bit boat-like, the Daytona, but, you know, it's still pretty ridiculous to drive a car as big as this round a English track such as this. Next up, I wanted to go for something a little bit different, throw something different in here, so I decided to throw this in. This is the Mercury Cougar Eliminator. That's a cool name, isn't it? 335 horsepower, 3,435 pounds of weight. The second least powerful vehicle here today. However, it is the third lightest, so we'll give it that. The Eliminator, honestly, I just threw this in because, again, it's something a little bit different. You probably weren't expecting to see the Mercury Cougar. But you know what, it actually surprised me. This is actually a surprisingly good car to drive. This really could almost rival the Boss 302 when it came to its handling capabilities. It was really darn good, actually. And maybe not quite as good as the Firebird, maybe even on par, to be honest with you, but most of these cars drive pretty similar, by the way, just in case you're wondering. They're a bit slow, lumbering, kind of as you'd expect classic muscle cars to drive, however there are subtle differences. But yeah, the Cougar, I actually kind of enjoyed driving the Cougar. I've never driven this car, as far as I'm aware, in pretty much any Forza game. I think I played with it around on 4 a little bit, didn't even touch it on 5. But yeah, genuinely surprised me with how good this car is. Maybe you shouldn't overlook it as much as I've been doing, because this is probably one of the better driving classic muscle cars. And again, you know, if you wanted to go B-class racing or so on, this could be an interesting choice, certainly. Yeah, the Cougar was a good car to drive, surprisingly enough, although I do mess it up around that final corner there. Next up, Plymouth Cougar. This is the 426 Hemi model, 425 horsepower, 3,880 pounds of weight. The heaviest vehicle here today, and my god is it heavy, almost 4,000 pounds of weight. Yeah, the Cougar is heavy, and because of that, the Cougar is not great to drive. This probably the second to least most unusable vehicle, that makes sense. Yeah, this is probably the second worst handling vehicle here today. Was not particularly good. The Cougar did have one strength, however, and that was this thing was monstrously quick in a straight line. Out of everything here today, this was the quickest car in a straight line. It was super, super quick through the straights, but when it came to the corners, you had to be really careful with the Cougar. It just wanted to let go. You can see it letting go there. Really enjoyed doing that. Really enjoyed hanging its tail out there. You know, straight line speed will only get the car so far. It does actually have to take the corners well as well, so it'll be interesting to see sort of what time this gets, especially compared to, say, the Boss 302, which is a car with very little power compared to the Cougar, but it does handle better. So yeah, I mean, this car has a shaker hood, that's cool. I'm not a huge fan of the Cougar, to be honest with you. It does come in purple and green, which is great, so yeah, purple car looks awesome, but and it has the shaker hood, which is cool, but the Cougar just wasn't particularly my cup of tea. And finally today, it wouldn't be a classic muscle car episode without this showing up. This is the Chevrolet El Camino, 450 horsepower, 3,820 pounds of weight, the most powerful vehicle here today. However, it is the lowest PI vehicle here today, and that speaks volumes about its handling, because as you can see, my god, this thing has no handling whatsoever. This is the most boat-like vehicle to drive here. It is literally like sailing a boat, especially in the rain as well. That's what the El Camino is like. It's basically sailing a boat. It is quick, I will give it that. 450 horsepower certainly is not something you should look down upon. The Cougar's probably a little bit faster, but the El Camino can't really make up that speed through the corners, because it's probably worse than the Cougar through the corners. Yeah, I mean, it was fun. I will give the El Camino that. It was one of the more fun vehicles here today, just because of how silly it is, but as far as a competitive racing vehicle, you'd be pushing it to try and make the El Camino competitive. I have seen competitive El Caminos before, but they do have a substantial amount of tuning done to them. Yeah, the El Camino has never been known in Forza for being particularly great to drive. I mean, on Forza 4 it was virtually unusable as a race car. 5 you could make it work, 6 you can kind of make it work as well. But yeah, as far as it stands stock, it just lumbers, and it's great fun. Anyways, onto the times, and the Daytona was actually the quickest car of the day, going to 113 for 133.714. That means it's quicker than a Civic Type R and a Clio. It's not a bad showing from the Daytona, considering sort of how out its depth this, and indeed all these cars here today, are out their comfort zones. On to the big block of cars now. The Cougar Eliminator just misses out on the Charger RT by a 1,000th of a second, going into 119th with a 134.411. Plymouth Cougar goes into 120th for 134.513. Despite being the least powerful vehicle here today, the Boss 302 actually goes into 121st with a 134.520, which just goes to show my theory of actually having a bit less power might actually help these cars. And finally on this board as well, a Firebird Trans Am 123rd, 134.815. Not a bad showing from any of these cars, to be honest with you. It really surprised me how quick that Cougar and the Mustang was, actually. Both of those cars put a really good showing. Yeah, solid cars, especially the Cougar. Really surprised me. Going down to the bottom of the board for today, and the Camaro SS goes into 129th for 146.012. A little bit quicker than a Corsa VXR, slower than an AW11. The Camaro is not a great car. I'd rather take the AW11 any day of the week. And the El Camino, unsurprisingly, is the slowest car of today. 132nd, 136.276. Slower than a Volvo 850R, a little bit quicker than a CRX. The El Camino was heavily out of its depth here, but at the same time, it was fun. It was good fun. So yeah, anyways, that is it for the classic muscle car episode. Join me next time, or tomorrow in fact, when we'll be taking a look at some retro muscle cars, and then it will all become something, whatever, I can't speak, I apologise. Modern muscle cars on Friday, so yeah, you've got a week of muscle cars, so enjoy that. Anyways friends, I want to thank you all very much for watching. My name's been The Real Emile, and until next time, farewell.